What is your "I was into X before it was cool" thing?
Swine flu. I got it in February 2008 and was the third reported case worldwide.
Snowboarding, you couldn't even bring them to resorts. 1983.
Hulu in 2008. It used to be completely free, browser-based, with no ads. It was the only way for me to watch new episodes of Heroes every week.
I first saw The Simpsons when it was a sketch on The Tracey Ullman Show, and thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. I was ecstatic when I learned they were making a full cartoon of it. I watched it religiously up until about season 15 or 16 before I finally switched to every once in a while like we all eventually did. Don't want to brag, but I bought some N95 masks the second week of January.
Home computing. I started in 1976. Had Tesla stock at $28.
I worked for a movie theater chain in 1996, and my boss got a VHS copy of Jesus vs. Santa Claus at some industry event. We watched that video a dozen times and laughed our asses off. About 6 months later South Park debuted on Comedy Central and we were very excited to see it had been picked up.
Spotify. I remember I had to use a VPN to use it in my country.
Skateboards. 1964 also.
I was sleeping with my ex long before everyone started doing it.
I was into memes when they were called demotivational posters. I remember going around to stores trying to find all 6 issues of Infinity Gauntlet. I had read one while waiting on my mom to finish grocery shopping and I was hooked. That made me a dork in the early 90s. But now it's a billion-dollar worldwide phenomenon. Fucking A.
I came across the Lonely Islands website when I was about 11 or 12, 02, 03, before Andy Samberg or the other two, Akiva and Jorma, were big. They had a video where they spliced all these old NES games together into a skit and it was friggin' hilarious.
I got Instagram when it was a photography app back in 2011. Gmail, 2004-ish, when it was invite-only. My friend had a small amount of invites.
The How to Train Your Dragon books. Unfortunately they're still not cool yet.
Bitcoin. Altcoins didn't exist when I got started with it. Mandatory disclaimer. No, I'm not a millionaire now.
Hating Bill Cosby. Had to do volunteer work at the local Jell-O museum for 30 hours to graduate high school in 2008. He used to be the spokesperson for Jell-O. I had to listen to him talk about Jell-O in old commercials for 30 hours on a loop. Edit. I should also mention it's the town where a bunch of kids acquired a mass conversion disorder and all thought they had Tourette's. I actually have mild Tourette's, so that's another thing I did before it was cool.
I had COVID-19 before the world went insane over it.
I watched Avatar: The Last Airbender when it was running live as an adult and people gave me shit for watching a children's cartoon. Edit. Since this comment is receiving a lot of attention, I want to talk about Lake Laogai. The term Laogai comes from Laodong Gaizeo, which translates into reform through labor, were actual Chinese forced labor prison camps. Anyone who was seen as a counter-evolutionist by the Chinese Communist Party was sent to Laogai, where they are forced to produce goods that get exported to the West with all the profit going to the state. The camps also served to reform political and ideological thoughts of prisoners to line with the Communist Party's ideology. While the camps are no longer called Laogai, they still exist as prisons today.
I remember when you could read every comic featuring Deadpool in under 2 hours. This was around the time I said, an Iron Man movie. And they got some wash-up to play him? This'll go over worse than Daredevil.
I was in marching band with Markiplier, he was my trumpet section leader. It's weird seeing all these memes and all these famous people talking about a guy the first was in high school with.
Listening to Nirvana's Blue Song on student radio NZ in 1989 and thinking these guys are good.
I had a friend in high school ask me in math class one day if I wanted to go to a concert with her that night. Her sister had extra tickets and she thought I'd want to go. It was a New Kids on the Block comeback tour and I said sure, why not. My mom didn't mind me going. We sat around chatting before the show and the opening act was some woman who appeared to be drunk but her music was really good. Nobody had ever heard of her and she only did a few songs, but her music was a total earworm that was hard to get rid of once it took hold. Went home that night and Googled her single, Just Dance, and downloaded it immediately. And that's how I discovered Lady Gaga.
Elmo when he was just a minor Sesame Street character. We used to watch Sesame Street at my shared house full of college kids. Was a way to unwind. Sounds silly but it was a thing. I liked Elmo. He was pretty chill.
When I was 4, I got inside our new refrigerator before they plugged it in. I was in there before it was cool.
I probably had one of the first top 10 channels back in 2011 where I would post top 10 video stuff about games. I gave up cause it was too much editing and work, but few years later those top 10 channels became very popular.
We weren't allowed to have cola much growing up, but we drank a ton of seltzer water. I kept drinking it as an adult and people made fun of me for how weird it was because it's not a thing people casually drank. They thought it was either a mixer, like they acted as if I was drinking straight margarita mix, or something from a frou-frou health store. Then fucking LaCroix came along, or whatever it was that made seltzer suddenly cool a few years ago. I mean, I'm glad it's even more common with more flavors and stuff, but I used to get teased so much for it. Xbox Live. I was in the beta. It came on a CD that you had to install on your OG Xbox. Halo CE on XB Connect was where the real action was, though.
Drinking Baileys from a shoe.
I read Fight Club because it was featured prominently in Borders. At the time, no one had heard of it or its amazing author.
I used to record myself playing video games when I was like 5 or 6 when my parents gave me the VCR they replaced in the living room. Because of this early hobby, me and a friend did video game playthroughs on YouTube in 2007. We were certainly not the first, but we were damn early. We also used a cap card straight out of the gate rather than doing the old recording the screen crap that looked terrible.
Since my dad is a huge weeb, we bought a pack of 500 black medical masks because we saw people in Japan using it for sickness, allergies normally. A year later, pandemic. Being a degenerate weeb pays off, my dudes. Bonus story, once I wore one of these masks to school and the principal confiscated it because it was distracting, even though I had a mild cough and sore throat. I bet you feel really stupid right now, Mr. Malavar.
Reddit. This account is rather recent, but I discovered the platform in its infancy. It had less stuff back then, but the discussions were better. And then, mainstream caught up.
I was into vinyl before it made a comeback. And since nobody in the 90s or early 2000s wanted their records anymore, I basically got 500 plus records for free or nearly free. One of my brothers graduated HS in '94, and one his friends moved out to CA from NH. When he came back to visit, he brought a cassette tape of early Sublime. 2 to 3 years later they got big. 5 to 6 years later everyone in junior high had that Sun t-shirt and were trying to say that they discovered the best band ever. A similar thing happened years later with the Dropkick Murphys, but I'm not really into them, so I don't mind letting that one go. Seeing a therapist regularly.
I started watching Smosh videos when they had just a couple of them uploaded. They were probably the first YouTubers I watched religiously. Their first food battle videos were hilarious. There was nothing like good old Smosh. I had computers back when all they had was 8 kilobits of RAM. And a cassette drive for programs. And you would often spend all night typing in the program printed in a magazine to play it. Just to then have to go through it all due to a typing error. Tandy TRS-80 Model 1, 1980. Computers didn't really become popular at home until Commodore 64 etc. Also had the Sorcerer and Acorn and an old IMSI 8080 back then too. Helped a bit when the school finally got Apple IIe computers. Coincidentally, that's the last Apple computer I've used. Smiley face. I can see the use for them, but they would personally send me batshit crazy versus PC.
I read The Hunger Games before it was popular.
I've followed the Joe Exotic saga for years. I'm one of, 20 libertarians in the state.
K-pop. Way before Psy and BTS. When Gangnam Style was being played in bars, I was pretty shocked. I didn't expect it to go worldwide. Now the K-pop community is toxic and weird, and I don't understand how it got to the point it's at now. I saw Tegan and Sara when they were an opening act that they didn't even bother to turn down the lights for. Now it's like $60 for a ticket to their shows.
I was chugging Pabst Blue Ribbons years before it became the go-to hipster brew.
Jesus Christ. Half of these responses are seemingly from people who got into something before their peers and think they were ahead of the curve when they weren't even born yet when it became popular. Anyway, I saw Two Girls One Cup on 4chan months before it became mainstream. It had a different soundtrack.
Sperry's. Mind you, was not your basic, preppy white boy but a dark-skinned Mexican, with no sense of style. My mom heard these were the next fashion item and bought the shoes the summer before they blew up. Throughout the year, middle school got made fun of for my poor people shoes. I eventually got so frustrated and threw them away. August comes around and on the first day of school everyone is gassing each other up about their Sperry's. Even if I went back and bought or even found my old pair, I would have been teased for copying their style.
RuneScape too long ago. Okay, it was never cool but hell it was for me.
Donald Glover. He was part of a comedy group called Derek Comedy that was absolutely hilarious.
Was into the British Office before there was an American version.